Hey everyone, welcome to SoDA Series Live, a conversation series from the Society of Digital Agencies in partnership with Adobe, where we sit down with the creative leaders and entrepreneurs who are at the forefront of redefining digital and physical experiences through design, storytelling, and technology. I'm Talin, Wadsworth, principal designer at Adobe. I work on emerging products and technologies. And so this is one of my favorite things to do every month, is to get a little peek into what is driving the future of our creative industries. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Orion Tait, founder and creative chair at Residence and the founder of Buck. And as the creative chair of Residence, Orion holds the long-term creative vision of the network, so stewarding its values, culture, and principles that define its work and community. And it's so important to have that foundation to keep everybody together. He's also a filmmaker, fine artist, and graphic designer by training. We share that. And his career has been defined by pushing the boundaries of visual storytelling across animation, visual effects, and live action. So very excited to welcome Orion to the show today. Hey, Orion. Great to see you.
Good to see you too.
I'm really excited. And these are my favorite kind of conversations. Again, I just love getting into the weeds. And so who better to do it to if someone has had such an illustrious career and continues to do amazing work. So excited to have you here. And also excited to have everyone here with us in the chat. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Please feel free to say hello, tell us where you're from, and feel free to send in some questions. We'll be taking questions throughout. I'll find great ways, I think, to weave them in. And we'll save a few minutes at the end as well to take questions. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Okay. All right. Well, Orion, let's kind of dive into things. I always like to start, give us kind of some foundation, to who you are as a creative and a little bit of your journey. Again, I mentioned a few of the things that you've dabbled in before and has really guided your career. But tell us a little bit of the foundation of you yourself as a creative, as an entrepreneur, and some of your journey.
Yeah. I mean, my path to certainly to this role or this industry was not like a straight path. So I'll try to give the abridged version.
I find that most aren't straight paths, and I think that's really interesting. So
absolutely. That's something I always try to tell students and stuff too. So I mean, for me, I studied filmmaking and fine arts in college. I'm very much, I came from, we didn't have a lot growing up, but my parents really valued education, and so I got a really great liberal arts education. It wasn't like a trades education. They didn't have applied arts where I went to school. And I see that as a benefit. I kind of got a really broad, I learned how to write, how to think, really gravitated towards the creative arts, and like filmmaking and fine arts were kind of the creative parts of my college. So I really focused on that. But then after school, I just needed to work. And that was the circuitous part. I was paying off loans, and I did a lot of bartending and a lot of other stuff. I actually, funnily, kind of credit Adobe in some weird ways for my introduction into this world. I was working at a film archive, and I was working for Reuters. I was in charge of like the Reuters back library. So I wore a beeper, and I would get paged if there was a big event. Often, like if somebody died, I would have to come in the middle of the night and pull all of the archives and get them up on the wire. And so when there wasn't an emergency photo event, I would just be going through the archives, and I found myself like I had to digitize them, I had to clean them up, and I was using Adobe products. And it was my first introduction. I'm one of the last generation that was like cutting film like physically, right? And this was my first introduction into kind of the immediacy of digital image making, and I just got hooked. And so I would like take all the photos from the archive and started doing like collage and kind of teaching myself graphic design. And that's kind of how I got into it. And I ended up going into print design. I then was, in the late 90s, was very involved in interaction, early interactive, like Macromedia, Director, Flash, like these kinds of tools that were just emerging. And it was really like democratization of that world where all these all these things were at our fingertips. And so we were experimenting and trying new things. And that's really kind of what got me into this industry. And I just fell in love with it. So very, very self-taught in the design and animation world. But I think having that background in filmmaking and fine arts, like even though it's circuitous and it took me a while, I really didn't start my career until my late 20s, like kind of early 30s. Yeah. And then, yeah, from there, I did, I think, the kind of traditional career path of going from kind of individual contributor into art director into manager. And I'm sure you can relate to this. There is that journey that everyone has where you kind of go from individual contributor into more of team leader. And I think for me, that has also translated into business leader. It's not an uncommon story. I met my creative partner at a company called Heavy. I don't know if you remember Heavy.com. It was one of the early kind of broadband content sites. And a lot of the folks from Buck kind of came out of there. And we learned, I think everyone's a mentor, right? And I think I learned as much from how not to run a business there as I did how to run a business. And I think me and my creative partner met there and we were like, you know what, like we've learned so much here, but we want to go do it on our own. And so we left and started Buck. And then there was just a massive, over the last 20 years, we went through a lot of growth, kind of from a core team of 4 or 5 folks to, now like 400 plus. Yeah. And then that vision and that sort of way of working expanded into Residence, which is now multiple companies. But I think it's all kind of started from the same place of like realizing that this is a team sport and that, if you have the skills to kind of do what it takes to create things together and encourage kind of the best work and the best culture and, kind of joint working towards excellence, that really translates and scale. And so that's kind of been the journey. Yeah.
I want to get back to that, but there was something that I wanted to draw a finer point on, which I think is, unless you've been through it, I think can be one of those opaque or often like hidden elements of being a creative and being a professional, in an industry. Is this constant kind of evolution that's happening, as you're discovering, new opportunities, new problems to solve. And I don't know if you could go like a little deeper on that, just in terms of if there were moments that stood out where, you had the opportunity to work with a client that opened up a new type of service or a new type of, deliverable, or a new tool came on that allowed you to do something that you weren't able to do before, and now you're just expanding the story of, say, how you deliver storytelling for a brand. I don't know if there's anything that stands out for you in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many over the years. I think it is. I do kind of credit it with the time that we started, but I think this is actually, I feel for my kids who are in college and starting out on their careers, there's so much rapid change right now, right? But I think if I look back at like the last 20 years, we sort of started that way, like Buck specifically. I credit a lot of our success with, what was in our kind of built into our DNA, like the group of folks that started it and have continued to grow it, is this just like curiosity and like always wanting to sort of seek the novel. And, I like the way Brian Collins frames it as like problem seekers rather than problem solvers. I think there's something to be said about that, right? Where you're just kind of like looking, you're very, at our core, I really do think of, even though Buck is very much an omnivore and does so many different things, as does now Residence with the addition of new specialists on our team. But at its core, I think Buck is a design group. It's a collective vision, but it's also all the sort of parts coming together to make something. And I think also kind of encoded and embedded in that is this kind of co-creation and this kind of like, I would say like an attempt to be ego-free in the way we work, right? This really collaborative way of working. And, we lost a lot of jobs that way, but we just stuck to it because it's the way we worked, right? And so we had folks who repped us that were like, you really need to start naming directors. And it's not that we resisted. We're just like, this isn't this isn't how we work. But but I think what ended up happening because of that is that we've always been much more somewhat like agnostic. We're about like, what is the problem in front of us and what are all the component parts that we need? I think this happens to everyone at a certain point when you're taking on larger and larger challenges that are beyond what you're capable of. Very quickly, it's a death of ego, right? Where you're like, what are all the pieces that we need to make the greatest work we can? And this really becomes a collaborative co-working exercise. And that led to massive growth for us. So like a specific for Buck's story is, you know, this was kind of mid 2000s, was really an in-housing story. I think Ben talked about this with you when he was on the podcast with you, right? It's like, we really saw Silicon Valley, power was consolidating that way. They were bringing in creative teams and they needed folks that could co-create with them. And our culture was built for that. And so we saw a massive expansion where some of our, you know, other folks in our space started to contract and saw that as a threat. We really saw that as an opportunity. Yeah. So that's like the biggest one that I could point to. And I think we're seeing it right now with so much disruption happening right now. It sort of just continues that change. And yeah, ultimately it's maybe sounds a little trite or easy, but it's just about staying curious, right? It's like just always being, and, you know, I kind of follow that curiosity with you know, measured, let's call it measured optimism, right? Like, I think at our core, like as a group, we're an optimistic group. You know, we are going to be like, I think creativity ultimately is an act of optimism, right? You are imagining, hey, this isn't as good as it can be, or this can change, or this thing that we have to solve, or you're projecting a future or something that could be better. And to me, that's an act of optimism, like to want to create something that's different, that's new, that's better than what exists right now, you know?
Yeah. Really well said. And I think it's those same qualities, that same curiosity that gives me a lot of confidence. You know, again, I think I get asked a lot about, you know, these new technologies. Of course, you know, I'm now a tool maker, so I'm on that kind of other side and really thinking about, you know, very, very deeply, very critically about the impact of these tools. And, you know, in talking with creatives, you know, all across the spectrum, seeing the ways in which they are problem solving, seeing the ways in which they're just engaged very deeply with, well, what door does this unlock for me? What am I willing to do or not do, and how does that, you know, chart a path forward? And it is that kind of constant evolution that gives me a lot of confidence. That constant like, sort of push towards, what does this allow us to do now? What stories does it allow us to tell now?
Yeah, and what are we gaining and what are we giving up, right?
Yeah.
And what are we sacrificing? And I think, you know, I saw this. It's always like, I do think we are, without saying the word, we're all talking about AI here right now. So I'll just say the word. But I also kind of like Jaron Lani's take on it, if you're familiar with him. And, you know, that he wrote a great article in the New Yorker like a few years ago that was basically like, you know, there is no AI. And I kind of like that take in some ways, which is that by calling it artificial intelligence or intelligence specifically, you're kind of abdicating responsibility in a way, and also not recognizing that it's people ultimately. Like, it's not an intelligence. This is all fed. It's a synthesizing machine of all of the creative work of people. It's like Soylent Green is people. It's like AI is people. It's like, right. And it's like, I think that it is ultimately it is backwards facing. It is like everything we've done, and it's amazing at synthesizing it. So I prefer to think of it rather as this like black box intelligence. And this is something that Jaron talks a lot about. We think of it more as a collaborator, and that ultimately, like, this is the optimistic part. I think there's a lot to be pessimistic about, but I think it's not about replacing jobs. Like, if you call it this sort of intelligence that's taking over and replacing our jobs, that in some ways is abdicating responsibility, right? It's up to us. And I think ultimately as creative people, it's up to us to imagine that future and also recognize that like everything, that AI is great at everything backwards facing, but everything that's new, it's our responsibility to push things forward and to make things new and imagine things. And AI can't do that. It really can. It is not, there's no authorship there. There is no future. It's all backwards facing, you know? So.
I 100% agree. Actually, this week I've been writing a piece for a little zine we're getting ready to deliver at our yearly conference, and I was really thinking about, to kind of build on this, what is creativity? Creativity is also discovery, and you can be, if you're not confronted with a decision-making moment, then you are abdicating. You're just sort of allowing systems to make choices for you. And you maybe have that black box. I don't know how this is making decisions for me. And that authorship really is an act of, it's a vulnerable act. It's a courageous act to say, I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to make a different decision here. And it's the result of that in the evaluation of that then leads me to the next decision point and the next decision point. And that's innovation, right? Not, said like this backward, like all the decisions were already made. It can tell me about what decisions were made previously. I have the means to make the decision for what happens next.
Yeah. And I think to me, like intrinsic to that or encoded in that is like, I love like the philosophy of like the AIM studio, which was you can't delegate understanding. And I think that's when we talk about the cost of AI, that's what I see a lot of sometimes, right? Is like this idea. And again, this is like, if you think about it as a black box, or it's like, it's very easy. Like how many times those of us who play with AI and are using AI where it spits the thing out and you're like, that's fucking amazing. Like, and then you walk away and you come back and you're like, wow, that's not amazing. That's not actually, good. Right? It actually is not good. And I think to me, that's that idea of like, really, it's so tempting in the pursuit of efficiency, but we have to ultimately, we really need to hold on to understanding. We can use it as a collaborator, but not at the expense of our own understanding of a problem or a novel solution or an understanding of our organization. Like it's so good at accelerating things, but that means it can also accelerate problems and bad thinking, right? And I see a lot of that these days.
Yeah, I agree.
But if we're talking about design and creativity, like bad design too, right? Or like sameness, it's very good at averaging, right? And I think that's a lot of the threat right now is towards averaging and towards mediocre, and brands especially, they need to be distinct. And I don't think that AI is helping with that, right? This is a human effort of creativity to be more distinct. Yeah.
And I have a lot of trust, I think, as well in the audience and the people who are receiving these messages or interfacing with the world and the messages coming into them, that even if they can't put their finger on it, like there's some deeper awareness that they have a recognition of the choices that were made or not made in delivering this, like, and really making discernment, is this even worth my time, to engage with?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this is a great sort of tangent. And this is why I love these conversations. But I also wanted to get back to, I wanted to talk about residents, because I'm really interested in how you're approaching this, because again, I think the model oftentimes is pretty standard. You don't have a collective. You essentially have like one who's kind of like, kind of eating up the others, kind of acquiring the others. And that's kind of pretty kind of traditional model, especially in the agency world. But I want you to talk about residents and, how you're intentionally kind of building out this network, and kind of what it means and what you're hoping to achieve with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that it is, it's related to what we were just talking about. I think it's recognizing that like specialty and distinction is actually a strength, not a weakness. I think there has been a lot of history of kind of like rolling up companies and wanting to unify everything under one brand, and recognizing that I think what the world needs is distinct voices right now, distinct specialties, points of view, and sort of how can we celebrate that and support that while also giving everyone kind of shared connections and resources to learn and grow from each other, and from that difference, right? It's like there is that always the collision, like this is where new ideas happen. And so that's kind of that has been the vision, and it is also the model that we're building that supports it. So it's right now it's 9 independent companies united, right? Independent meaning like independent brands. We're all under one company and one, ultimately one P&L, you could say. But we all every company retains their brand and their, their culture and their point of view. And so I think, a lot of, for me, what I recognize and we talk about a lot is that there's a difference between values and culture, and there should be. And that, there's so many cultures within residence, like different cultures and ways of working and types of clients and timelines, and location and, all that stuff. These are unique cultures that we want to encourage that differentiation. But what makes it so we can all work together is that we have a shared set of values, right? And those need to be shared, but the culture and everything else can and should be very differentiated. And so, some examples of that is that we don't compete. Like, that's a very concrete thing. We don't compete against each other. Another concrete thing is like, we're all in one big giant Slack. I think Ben mentioned this too. Like, we Slack harder than Slack does. So we're all sharing resources, right? We have all kinds of different, not just channels, but also like consortiums and groups that are, we have a big, lots of different AI pods that are working on different things together. And so when you have someone who's thinking about it from a strategy perspective, like part and sum, or a measurement perspective, and then someone who's talking about like, how does this, work with experiences and in-life experiences, and how does this work with brand and with expression? And, we have a digital group. And so all of these folks together sharing, is kind of the promise. It's like, gathering around the fire, and it's working. It's been really, really exciting and inspiring to see, Yeah.
That, what it reminds me of, because I'm of course, have broad interests like all, all of us,
all designers. Yeah.
But it makes me think about, like, I follow a couple like evolutionary scientists, and, and what we've learned, about our own evolution and the different branches of our family, and the ways in which isolated groups were the ones that died off.
Yep.
That it actually is evolutionary, is the interfacing and interacting with those different perspectives, with those different capabilities. If I don't have what's needed to solve this problem, you do. You might.
Yeah.
Right. And
that
strengthens the whole, and we can move forward together. So it is that diversity and experience and thought. Again, like, we're bringing together people who might be able to solve this new problem. Like, we don't know what it's going to be, but you might have it, so. That's
right. And I think in that takes, like, it's hard work. It can be hard work, right? Because, and there are, I think about this with my kids sometimes, right? It's like, there are, obstacles, and there's going to be suffering in there, but that's how you grow, right? Ultimately. And so I think there's something about that when we talk about shared values, that is certainly one of them, right? Is like, everyone in residence very much has kind of a low ego growth mindset, right? And part of that comes with a confidence in how great they are at what they do, right? And being really excellent at what they do. They're not coming from a place of threat. They're coming from a place of interest and curiosity and opportunity. And, oh, that's like a challenging thing. That's a sticky thing. There's some tension there. Like, let's like lean into that and figure that out. Right. And I think that's where we all end up growing together.
Yeah. I love that. And actually, I wanted you to just maybe speak to some of those values again, even given humans, like we need something that pulls us all together. So you mentioned one of them there. What were some other values do you have a charter? Like, is it something where, like, you have you have the sort of manifesto, or have all these things outlined, then people have to, almost like sign to do that.
Right.
Talk about, like, what are the values that tie you all together, that you all kind of collectively agree upon, that really helps you, at least as a foundation, springboard, into the sort of next iteration, or the next level of residence?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, like I do think like values are, you know, I'm Gen X, right? I come from Gen X. I'm very suspicious of authority. And so my journey towards kind of those frameworks, value frameworks for, you know, mission statement and vision statement and all that, was one of suspicion growing up through, you know, and I think like it's, you know, partly coming from kind of the era of like Enron and stuff, right? Where they had all their values printed up on the thing, but their actions did not back that up, right? And that's the death of culture. And so what's interesting though is I come all the way around to the other side where I see so much value in communicating them really effectively. So absolutely, we have all those things. We have all of our values written down. But I would say they're kind of like, it's more about like, it's more like archaeology, right? Is you can't like manufacture values. It's more like you can uncover them. Like what are our shared values? And so yes, we have them all written down. And you know, there are kind of specific to the type of group that we are and stuff, and they're important and they're pillars. You know, it's you know, community, craft, inspiration, um, uh, collaboration or co-creation. So those are kind of like the main pillars, and they're important, and it's a framework that we talk a lot about. But what I think of as a much more simple way of thinking about it, especially when we're talking about groups that we're bringing in, is really like people and work. It's a focus on people. It's a focus on making like the best work we can possibly make and the best experience we can make taking care of our people. And like those things are not always like, they can be mutually exclusive. You can see cultures that have valued one over the other, you know, that have sort of chased in the chase for the best work and for, you know, awards and stuff, just grind the people. You see the opposite happen, right? And I think have seen this a lot in kind of like some of these the big Silicon Valley boom, where you're really just focusing on retention and attraction and all the benefits and all of that, and you sort of lose sight of making the great work sometimes. And so I think, as in most things, it's about finding a balance, and it's not, there's no perfect. It's a constant pursuit of those things, right? And you're constantly like failing, but it's the effort that makes it valuable. And so I think that's kind of when we think about who we're going to bring in, it's all this stuff to uncover that they also think that way and value those things.
Yeah. It sounds like it's an approach too. Like you're looking as you're you know, identifying those groups, as you're meeting with people. There's a sense that you get, are we going to approach this in the same way? Are we pointed in the same direction? So, but I like how those values, I think very clearly stated, at least gives people a starting point, right?
And I imagine you've experienced this like in your role right now or in your career, right? Where there are just like I've had some like amazing designers that I've worked with over the years whose work I just respect so much, but they really are like individual contributors. They're not interested in co-creation, right? They're like, I want to go solve this thing. Like I have a vision for it and I want to go solve it. And we've made that mistake a few times because they're such excellent craftspeople and really, really appreciate and value their work, of bringing them into their organization, and they're not successful. And I think that's a big one, right? I think that's why kind of collaboration or co-creation is a big value of ours. It's like, we want people in that want to create together and learn together and grow together. Like that has to be part of the value prop, you know?
Yeah. No, that resonates with me. And I've seen very similar things, and it's almost like you can feel the antibodies, you know, start to come out when you
totally.
You're like, oh, okay, I see how this is going to go.
Yeah. That's a good way. That's a good way to put it. I think a lot about that when you think about culture. Yeah, for sure. And I don't think that's where I'm like, I don't think it is not a top-down exercise what we're building. Like it really isn't. We can set the tone, you know, and we can connect the dots, but it is really I love that metaphor, you know, of antibodies. It's like, if you have a strong culture, it is gonna take care of itself, you know?
Yeah. And actually, you know, there was a great, there was something I heard last year that connects directly to that, which is, you know, being a great leader is about building a team or an organization that builds itself.
Right.
You know, that ultimately, like, your measurement is really, can the people collectively come together? Are they given the tools that they need to solve that problem?
100%.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And, you know, another metaphor I like is kind of the gardening metaphor or forest metaphor of like, I think of residents. I think of the residents team, which is a very thin layer of the executive team and those that are kind of supporting the network, as like the soil. Like, we are the soil or the mycelium network, right? We're like helping to move resources and create a healthy environment for each of our, you know, plants to grow, and we're not telling them how to grow, and we can't grow it for them. Right. So
the mycelium network. I mean, yeah. You and I must be interested in the same thing. It's like another one I've spent a lot of time thinking about, like this sort of the relationship of trees and fungus. You know.
yeah.
So yeah.
Right, because I think often in you know, our Darwinian way of thinking is we think of it as you know, survival of the fittest. And I think science is starting to uncover that that's not always the case. There's a lot of mutualism in the natural world, right? And I think that's the way I like to think about what we're building. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, you know, again, I always love to give people that window, I think, into even some of the mechanics, right, of running a studio or an agency or you're running something like this. Like, what are some of those things that you're doing from a program or process standpoint to create the soil, right? To create this sort of network of support. Like, do you do like newsletters, get-togethers? Like, how are you keeping? You mentioned the Slack channel. Like, give us just a little window. Again, we don't have to go too deep.
It is all of it. Honestly, it's all of it. It's not one single thing, right? It has to be everything. And I think it's like you were saying, it's also creating a culture where everyone else is spinning those up, right? So you're creating an environment where, you know, I kind of like to say, like, we're going to build. Our job is to build those bridges, but we're not asking anyone to cross them. We're certainly not forcing anyone to cross them, right? And so I think we've made, when we first started out, I would say, like, there was a lot of learning, a lot of like early mistakes of kind of trying to over engineer collaboration frameworks. And I think, and playbooks and stuff like that. And I think, like, those are really things we needed to learn and needed to go through. And I think were valuable learnings. And I'm not just saying that we don't have all those, we still do, but it's really recognizing that it is an organism and you need to build the conditions for the organism. So yeah, some more specifics. I think we do have a lot of pods is what we call them, but they're, you know, everyone is a specialist in their own practice or practices. Some of our companies have multiple practices like Buck, but I would say that they, you know, a lot of this came from like the growing learnings and growing pains from Buck. You know, Buck went from, like I said, from, you know, a handful of us you could count on one hand to over 400. And not a, you know, that was, I think a lot of the growth happened within, you know, 7 years or so. And there was a lot of, we used to be very federated and isolated, and there was a lot of work to bring everyone together. But then there's also been a lot of work to undo some of that and recognize that we need also, you need both like individual and collective ownership. And so I think residence has been kind of an extension of that, where we, you know, we just came back from our AGM, our annual general meeting, which is with all of the leadership, which is now like 40 plus people. And it was just about sharing stories, sharing vulnerabilities, sharing projects. You know, we had a whole AI day, which was whole day talking about AI, but it was a lot of people just like sharing their experiments, sharing all of the things, you know, amazing things that they're building and so much inspiration. And so I think that's a lot of it is inspiration. I mean, that is, inspiration is our official value. It was innovation for a while, but I think like encoded in that inspiration is that idea of innovating, like wanting to inspire. And so there's so much of that, I think is where and then, we do a lot of events that are for our communities. We also a differentiator for residents is that we do have It's Nice That, we call them our community groups, but we have It's Nice That, Creative Lives in Progress, and they are, they throw Nicer Tuesdays events. So we're not just bringing clients and residents folks to that, but also the broader creative community. And so I think it's all of this stuff. It's all of this, like creating pathways for sharing and for resources. And it's not one single thing. One I would point to is we have, like, this is more on the business side, right? Is like, we have a global new business and incoming meeting. So it's like, it's like everyone. It's like everyone who's across new business in residence is meeting once a week and going through everything and talking about, which is, to me, that's a lot about like trust and building trust. Like, I don't think there's a lot of networks, especially if you're a competitive network, where you're going to be like sharing leads and talking through like intricacies of, what, I think about it as like almost a fiduciary responsibility to our clients of like, we don't force collaboration, but everyone chooses to collaborate. They want to, right? Because they trust that this person is going to be the best fit for it. And also at the same time, that's like, if I'm not the best fit, if Buck is not the best fit for this client thing, like we want the client relationship. We want the outcome and the output. And that's like more of the longer game.
Yeah. I mean, that is, I mean, it's inspiration, very inspiring, I think, to kind of go like against the grain, or go a little bit against the status quo, and create an environment where people have that transparency and have that trust. And I really appreciate the ways in which you sort of speak to both the more tactical things, like, hey, we meet and talk about new business, and this is what it's sort of geared at, and this is what it unlocks for residents. And then the other sort of, again, the sort of the outer halo of work as you extend outwards to the things that build culture and build those shared bonds and share those shared perspectives. It's a big reason why my investment in Adobe is mostly because of Adobe design and really growing the culture of design at Adobe, because when I joined, it was like one designer for every 20 engineers.
Right.
And so we were faced with this environment where we're really, what we had is we had our own group, and that really gave me the confidence and the foundation to go forward and do my great work. And so how do we build out that culture that allows for each of the teams, each of the sort of specialists to go out and have the confidence to do their work, because they're like, these people have my back, these are my people, they're going to support me in the face of any challenge that might come my way.
And I think it is that, like, I think it is like building that culture of belonging and kind of psychological safety. That's a lot of the culture work that we have to do at scale, right? That's how you can kind of scale that. And that's not that is not a one person or a leadership team's responsibility. That kind of course it gets infused from that, but that's kind of an everyone responsibility. And then from there, we talked about growth mindset, or like, vulnerability. I think that's like a big, leadership principle, I would say, right? Is like this. And I saw this so much at our annual general meeting, is everyone, I think really for the first time, this was our fourth one that we've done, but was being very vulnerable about like, what are those challenges? And I think that's something that does come from leadership. Like, you need to model that, right? Like if we're all just judging each other's output and P&Ls without sharing our own vulnerabilities. Like, I remember, I had a close friend who was a print designer in a past life, and she talked about this kind of culture she was in where her manager, who was the design lead at the magazine, did not create that was not vulnerable or create psychological safety, and everyone would line up in her office with like their books for their layouts for the week, and everyone's like, oh, don't look at mine, mine's ugly, it's gonna, like, and that's obviously that can create so much toxicity, but also just isn't going to lead to good outcomes and growth. I think you can control that for a short amount of time, but you can't scale that.
No, you need to be able to set the tone, create the environment, create that soil, and then allow hopefully that example to, again, like, people buy into that. They want to buy into something, right? They want to say, what can I find a place in this? And then how can I extend and be a part of that? Given the opportunity, I think people are the best creatives, I think, are ones who are willing to take that leap and to have that vulnerability, because they know, like, hey, this is my crew. We see the same thing that's going to give us the confidence to go forward, especially now, and with this time right now.
Yeah, and I think, like we touched on it earlier, but I think what is it, like iron sharpens iron? What is that, the term? I think there is this quality, right, that I've seen at Buck and the other groups and residents of, like, there is a real confidence and desire to be the best. Again, this goes back to like wanting to make the best work, right? It's not about, yes, of course it's intrinsic, like I want to be the best designer, but it's also like, I want to make the best, most beautiful things and put them out there. And to do that, like, being surrounded by all these other amazing people are going to push me and challenge me, and you want that, right? And I think that's like, to have a culture that supports that requires vulnerability and requires belonging. Like, you can't be that brave if you're under threat all the time, right? And I think we've seen a lot of organizations that can masquerade as that, but ultimately underneath it is a lot of ego posturing and a lot of like proving and a lot of politics, and that's the death of excellence in my mind.
I 100% agree. Looks like we get a question from the chat. It's a great one, I think, to weave in right here. And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but the question from the chat is, do you think your measure of creative success has changed over the course of your career? Has it changed, or has it just matured? Has it expanded in some way? That's my little addition. But
my measure of creative success. Yes, I would say that. I mean, actually, I think, like, fundamentally, I don't think that. I think, like, certainly my taste has changed over the years, and I think, like, as kind of what the work that we've done and the types of work that we've done has expanded, I think an opening up and a recognizing what I would say that's changed as we've grown and as I've been exposed to more is thinking about impact and outcome versus kind of maybe like the process or the thing itself, right? It's like, what is this thing is beautiful, but how was it received? And, was it actually effective? Right. And so I think that's a thing that, I think especially it can be coming from a maker culture, which I think is wonderful. And it's a lot of, I think, what drives us and has driven Bucks and Residents' success. But I also think there can be a blind spot there where people are only thinking about that and not thinking about the customer, right? And not thinking about the context. And so I would say that's changed for me over the years.
Yeah. That seems, again, I think that's very matches, I think, really well with my own experience. I think as I've grown in my career, is that success, just the definition of it really expands. And you're like, you were talking about, like, did it resonate? Like, did it communicate the ideas that were meant to communicate? Did the team feel good about the work that they did? Like, success expands and just deepens as early in the career. Like, did it look cool?
Like, right, exactly. Yeah.
So,
but also, did it look cool? I think.
Yes,
I think,
yes,
I think
always, yeah, exactly.
because ultimately, I think
there.
yeah, for sure. It's all that stuff.
Yes, indeed. Well, there's another question in the chat. I'll just weave right in here. So Daphne Foreman, thank you, Daphne, for your question. Question for you is: so much of the best creative has always come from humanity and difference. What particular challenges to vulnerability, connecting as humans, do you see in the current AI-led efficiency environment?
That is like such a great question, Daphne, and like such an important one right now. I think we touched on it earlier. It's kind of like, what are you gaining and what are you giving up? And I think the challenge is that, you know, and I'm sure that for some folks this is preaching to the choir, but I think that it's what we touched on earlier, that I think like AI is an amazing accelerator. Unfortunately, it can also accelerate a lot of the problems that we're facing as an industry, as a society. And so one of them that I think a lot about is time. You know, I think that efficiency in its nature, what we're talking about is I forget, you know, what are those? There's like that paradox or that law that's essentially, right, like we saw it in the Industrial Revolution, that in the pursuit of efficiency, we were going to all get more time back or something, right? But it's like it just fills. And I think what I'm seeing happen, and this has been happening for my entire career, is that as more and more as possible, time becomes shorter and shorter, and the pressure is higher. And I have so much empathy for our clients, especially, right? It's like it feels like as media has expanded, we need to do so much more. And in the pursuit of efficiency and fastness, we're not given the time to contemplate to this understanding idea that we were talking about before, right? And the best work that I've ever seen and that I've ever done personally is when we were really given the time to understand the problem, but also like to make it an experiment and iterate before it gets shipped out the door. I mean, there's such a thing as spending too much time on something. We all know that, especially if you have your own art practice. You need to know when to walk away from the canvas. But I think there's something that happens when we give up all of that time. It's like the French, like the l'esprit d'escalier, that like spirit of the staircase of when you walk away and you're like, ooh, that's what I should have said. That's what I should have done. That's what and I feel like so often we just are shoving shit out the door as fast as we can, and not really recognizing, you know, what we're trying to solve. And I think that comes with time, you know, so.
Yeah. I agree. I think we've all felt that. We've all felt the enhanced sort of pressure. I had I was talking with one of my colleagues internally. We were doing some interviews last year in terms of how they were utilizing new tools, new workflows. And he said that he felt if he didn't have the maximum amount of agents running, that he wasn't being good at his job. Like if he didn't have them running all the time, and he was feeling that pressure like very uniquely, to the point where, you know, he would have agents running overnight, you know, right. Maybe they would come back with something good, maybe not. But the fact is they're running was kind of the measure, you know.
Yeah.
It was very telling. I think that is very illustrative of the pressure I think that we're all feeling.
Yeah. And I don't, you know, it's really hard to understand how to stop that or to pause that. And, you know, I do think that some of that is about value. I think like ultimately, if we talk about what we do, it's recognizing that there's a lot of value in deep creative work and understanding of problems and differentiating, like, you know, the commenter was just saying, right? I think that like ultimately that is a human endeavor and a human skill. And, you know, I think like an example that I've seen recently just in like behaviors is kind of, you know, the transcripts, like meeting notes and transcripts, right? It's like, I think that they are so useful, right? And they're so, I mean, it's like it is the promise of AI, right? Like I don't have to do this busy work of taking meeting notes. I can just be here and be present. And but I think what the behavior I see sometimes is that you're then just passing that along. You're not actually like ingesting and understanding what was said.
Yep.
Like, especially, you know, often for like in our groups, that's like sometimes a project lead or a producer's responsibility. And that is their job, is to truly understand, what was the client ask? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Like, are we getting to that place? And that understanding, if you're just, you know, outsourcing that without actually going through it and saying, you know, checking the work and you know, internalizing it, I think there's a real loss there. And I think there's also, like, as humans, we are great translators, and so it's not just understanding it, but then it's, you know, I think I've seen some instances where someone's like, wait, but that's not what they said on the call. See, look, they said this, and it's like, right, sure, but doesn't mean that that's what we should be doing, right? They're hiring us as experts to translate that. Yeah.
Great word. Actually, I was gonna say it if you did, translation. Like the power of translating something from one surface to another, from one medium to another, from one form to another. It's not just you said the sort of internalization, the integration, the synthesis of that.
Yeah.
It is the discovery that then happens in problem solving from one place to another. Right. And you know, there was a move towards, of course, design systems has been a huge topic in, you know, UX product design more broadly. And there was this sentiment, I think, like, we'll never have to draw a button again. And I thought a lot about, like, designers, people I know internally that would never start with the design system. Like, they would just like leave it over there. And it was in the act of creating the primitives. There was something in there. There's something in there that they were gaining, you know, as part of like their process as were developing their ideas. They almost needed that translation moment, you know, to get the engine going, to discover something, you know, that would come out of that moment of recreation or remixing or translation.
Yeah. I think, to me, I think like making is thinking, making is understanding, right? And it's like you're working through the problem. I mean, to me, that's the creative process that I think we all love. I think our clients love it. They don't want to give that up, right? And so, I think, to me, I'm excited about, like, I do see this trends happen, and I saw it, you know, in the digital, you know, kind of democratization that we talked about in the late 90s, of like, you know, that was a time of so much experimentation. As these tools became more democratized, I think there is a natural, like, thing that happens where you start breaking all those rules again. And so, like, you know, the sort of emigre, like postmodern kind of time of design that we lived through, I see that we're seeing that come back around, not just as a trend, but I think like as a practice. I think people, myself included, are craving that play and that experimentation. And so, you know, I'm you know, hopeful that's, you know, while it's a threat, I also think it's a opportunity.
Well, I mean, you know, there's part of me that my product designer part of me really lights up, because if there's something that is like at the foundation of my ethos of what I do, is to create that environment to allow for that kind of discovery and ideation and chance, you know, happening. You know, when you see the result, like, of a stray setting or trying something you might not understand what it's going to do, and you see the effect and you see the result, like, you didn't know that was going to be something that you liked before, you know.
No, exactly. And that's the fun, like, to me, that's the alchemy, right? That's where you're like, you just, you know, turn something into gold. And we've all felt that. Like, to me, that's the best feeling, right? When everyone is just, like, that's it.
I want that again and over, and like getting there is that's the joy of it, you know.
And it is often, as we know, it is often like the mistake or the new thing or the unexpected thing that led to that, right? And then reintegrating it. And I think AI is not going to give you that. That's a human experience.
No. There's this formative experience I had, because I was telling some students the other day about, you know, how, like, as a creative, you get to the point where you can kind of, you know, what you want the client to choose, the option you want them to go for, and you can kind of help them get there. And then there's this one moment where a client that we had at the studio I worked for in San Francisco, the partners who ran it, to their credit, they allowed me to include this really out there wild thing. Like, we had no idea how we were going to execute that. And to their credit, they let me include it in the presentation, and the client went for it. And that was the most sort of like terrifying and exhilarating moment, like as a creative, like, oh, now we have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Great moment.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, and I think like I do, going back to like kind of this idea of like efficiency and time, I think what happens when you're faced with that constraint, and we've all been guilty of this as designers, and this is like, yeah, this is where systems can be really valuable, but you're just going to pull that thing out of your back pocket that you've done before, right? You're just going to be like, oh, okay, I've only got a day, I'm going to do this thing that I know works, right? And that's where we get towards kind of sameness. And you've seen this as a trend in brand systems and brand design, right? Is this kind of leveling and this averaging. And so I think I think we will, and we can, and we should resist that.
Well said, Orion. That was actually a perfect note to end on. So I'm not gonna drag this out anymore, because that was just such a perfect note to end on. Orion, again, such a pleasure. Like, this is the highlight of my month, being able to talk to very thoughtful and creative people like yourself. Best of luck again and success with residents and with Buck. I hope I get the chance to see you all in person in some shape or form soon.
Likewise.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really great to talk to you. Thank you.
Bye. Have a great one. We'll see you. And thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back next month with another great conversation. If you ever have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Ping me, at Mr. Talin in most places. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts, feedback on the show, and we will see you all again next month.